Hello, everybody. Welcome to International Podcast Day 2017. Don't forget to be using hashtag International Podcast Day as we are here celebrating the power of podcasts and aiming to inspire, energize podcasters and connect new listeners with their new favorite podcasts. We're excited this hour to bring you a podcaster from Nigeria. How's it going, buddy? How are you? Oh, go ahead and unmute your mic. I think you muted yourself.
Okay, yes.
Yeah. How are you tonight?
Yeah. I'm doing good and I'm excited to be on International Podcast Day 2017.
Yeah, well, I appreciate you coming in. I'll let you introduce yourself and go through your little bio first. But I did want to introduce and talk about our sponsors real fast, those that are bringing International Podcast Day to reality. So Blueberry is a full-service podcasting company, a turnkey solution that will allow a new or veteran podcaster to get started and running within 15 minutes. Pay them a visit at blueberry.com. Studio 21 Podcast Cafe is a cafe with 2 working podcasting and video casting studios. The grand opening happens September 30th, where they'll be broadcasting live throughout the day. Pay them a visit at studio21podcast.cafe. Also, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, is a journey through the modern world of podcasting, uncovering the magic behind why podcasters do what they do. Get your copy of The Messengers in iTunes and on Amazon by visiting themessengersdoc.com. And thank you to Podable. Looking for your next favorite podcast? Podable revolutionizes podcast discovery by providing podcast recommendations tailored to you. Start by going to play.podable.com. That's play.podable.co. And finally, thank you to the Audacity to Podcast, the Modern Life Podcast Network, and Podbean. All right. Well, we are all set. We are very anxious to hear stories from Nigeria. It's so great to hear from you. I'm glad we've connected.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And I'll get out of the way and we'll be in the chat. We'll be looking forward to your conversation.
Okay. Thank you, Dave. Okay. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, everybody. It's a great honor to be online for International Podcast Day 2017. I want to say thank you to the co-founders of International Podcast Day, Dave Lee and Daniel J. Lewin. And also, Steve, I thank you, everybody, for this opportunity. It's a great honor to be representing Nigeria on this historic event. My name is Segun Akiode. I like to describe myself as a born teacher. I'm a chemical engineer turned career and employability coach. Currently, I do human resources, and that's some of the things I'm going to be sharing today. How a podcaster, how a chemical engineer became a podcaster and HR consultant. So a little bit of background about myself. I read chemical engineering in a Nigerian university, and currently I had to take a decision, which is some of the interesting things I'm going to be sharing with you. I read chemical engineering, and one of the major reasons why I read chemical engineering was because I felt I was good with chemistry, I was good with maths, the usual way most individuals go for career decisions in this part of Nigeria, where we believe what others are doing, what individuals around us are doing. We tend to take decisions around our career along that line. And that's how I landed in chemical engineering. I was good in maths, good in chemistry, and I was enjoying myself. But somewhere down the line, I never knew that something else was actually wired into my personality. And some of the interesting thing that was wired was the fact that when I started self-discovery in the sense that I noticed that I was good in the beautiful courses, maths, the thermodynamics, and everything. And I was doing fine. Yes, I had a second class upper, which is very close, just a few points away from a first class. So that means my grade were really showing for it. But somewhere along the line, I was doing unconscious self-discovery, trying to look at the things I was good at. So that begins to make me talk about the things that individuals need to decide on to choose a career. So that is looking at things I was good at, started looking at my strength, started looking at the passion, the things I was very interesting and good at. And somewhere along the line, I started to narrow down that I was doing well when it comes to things around humanities, things around volunteering to help people, things around manpower development, things around helping individuals to be the best that they could. And I noticed that at a point I was actually running a mini motivational blog. More at that time, it was in writing. Writing was actually called Nugget for Nobles. The website is currently down at the moment, but I was writing things around awakening the giant in you. I started noticing that most of the things I was doing was around youth development. I was really sewn out of things like that. So I started to ask myself that question to say, do I see myself in the oil rig? Yes, that was my initial thought. The initial thought of doing chemical engineering is that I was going to be in the oil rig with my safety overall and my safety boots, enjoying myself in my dream job. But somewhere along the line, I noticed, just as I said, around my strength, around the interest area. At that time, I didn't really know it was going to be chemical engineering. That's even the strange part about it. I never knew it was going to be chemical engineering. It's going to be human resources at that time. So what I needed to do was to start self-development. And that started kicking up when I was in 400 level. It was a 5-year course. When I was in 400 level in my university, I found myself leading my class in a particular coursework. It was technical report writing at that time. And there was a particular class assignment given to the entire department of over 100 students. I found myself being the person in charge of that particular thing. And that was when it started to click that it seems I'm good with people. It seems I'm good when it comes to leading others. So I started at that time to start my research work. So most of the things I started researching was, okay, is there something else I can do aside chemical engineering? Yes. Is there a particular area of course of study that will play to my strength? Yes. And I started researching. What were the things that come naturally to me? I started noticing I was drawn to career development. I was drawn to reading things, both books and online articles around career development. So I started embedding myself more in it. I remember at a point I came across a particular career CD called Career Expo at that time. And it said a lot of things about self-discovery, about discovering your personality, trying to make me to realize that what I am built to do or made to do is actually embedded in my personality. So I started to think, okay, if my career journey is embedded in my personality, that means I needed to discover what exactly is embedded in my personality. So I did a few personality tests and everything started to point around a field called human resources. And I started to research what exactly is human resources. At the time, after the my normal degree, university degree, there is a mandatory 1-year program in Nigeria called the National Youth Service Corps, NYSC, which was mandatory for everybody to go through. It was during that 1-year mandatory service that I discovered that there was a body called CIPM, Chartered Institute of Personnel Managers. And immediately I saw the particular brochure by a friend at that time. I said, yes, that's what I wanted to do. I think it's human resources. So I researched further. And even at that time, I was already noticing I was embedded in career development. I was helping friends to write CV. Even at that time, I was teaching people on how to do CV writing. So it was coming natural to me. I like knowledge sharing, just the same way I'm sharing this knowledge. I noticed that this is something I can do from morning to night without being paid for it. So I gradually shifted to human resources. And shortly before I was done with my mandatory NYSC, I made a decision that I was going to follow this career path. And I decided to have a career suited CV, more like bringing up my CV suited for an human resources job. And I started to ask myself a question: who is going to give a chemical engineer a foot in the door of an HR job? And I narrowed down and I found out that human resource consulting firm has that opportunity, and opportunity in the sense that they have opportunity to take a bet. I have most of the transferable skills that are required to do HR, human resources. I have analytical skills, research skills because of my background in chemical engineering. So I had to research those HR consulting firms and I put out my CV down to them. And fortunately for me, some of the HR consulting firm I sent my CV to at that time, package CV delivered to them. In Nigeria, getting a job is a big thing in the sense that the opportunities are not as available as expected. So job seekers have to actually go through trying to know where the jobs are. Some of those jobs are in what we call the hidden job market. Yes, there are a few job boards, there are a few internet related jobs that are available and put out there. But how I got my own first job in human resources was more like exploring what we call the hidden job market. Now, the hidden job market in the organization at that time was that they were recruiting for an HR consultant, a trainee HR consultant, but it was not made public. So because I'd made a decision, I was out to do it in human resources, I had to research those organizations, and I was just doing an experiment to share or even take a bet to say, is this going to work? Let me send my CV down there. Let's see what happens. And fortunately, I was invited for an interview. And 2 weeks down the line, I went for interviews that same week. And 8 weeks down the line, I started my first job in human resources. And that was how the transition started. I never had a job in with my chemical engineering degree or in the oil field. Yes, I had the opportunity to work called for a mobile scholarship at that time, but because I had not done my NYC, I couldn't do it at that time. So, and that's how the transition into human resources started. And that was about 8 years ago. And immediately that happened, it started to let me know that there are so many individuals that need the knowledge that I have, the knowledge of how I transited. So that started a small fire in me, which didn't get full blown until about a year after. About 1.5 years after I started my first job in human resources, I started up with recruiting for organizations, staffing services. So it was more like talent acquisition. So I was interacting with individuals, helping organizations to solve their talent issues, knowing what they need for candidates to get recruited, knowing the job descriptions, the basic things that the organization need in terms of filling roles. So the first job or the first responsibility for me was understanding what was in the mind of organizations. Now, unconsciously, all of this was making the journey full, or let me say, it was more like knowledge gathering for me, because that after 1.5 years of starting my first job, I now ventured into blogging. Earlier, I'd opened a free blog, segunakiode.com/.wordpress.com. It was free at WordPress. But later on, I found the need to open my own website. But before I did that, I now started to volunteer to write career articles, job search articles in one of Nigeria's biggest job board, Jobberman. And at that time, I was one of the very first individuals to write career articles. And that later on became my podcast. Now, what do I mean? I was writing and I was trying to fill a knowledge gap. Job information is very scarce. There are many job seekers. There are so many youth out there trying to find their ways. What exactly are organizations looking for? What exactly are organizations trying to look for when they're recruiting for employees? And I was in the middle of that, helping organizations to solve the talent issues. So I started writing about it. I started blogging about it, guest blogging about it on Jobberman. And immediately that was happening, I was fortunate enough to get involved in guest blogging on Jobberman at that time. Okay, that's the second. Okay, and I was involved in guest blogging on jobberman.com. And shortly after then, the knowledge gap was getting filled in the sense that I was supplying career-related information to individuals. And gradually, the momentum was going on Jobberman. Then later on, I started writing for Ventures Africa. Ventures Africa is a Pan-African news online journal, and I was writing for them on career related. I remember my very first article was how to find a job you love. And immediately I did that, I noticed the turnout. I noticed the fact that many individuals were really interested in job related information. And gradually, by 2015, I started my very first experiment to podcasting. And the experiment was very interesting because I was actually using my laptop. I started up by using my laptop, and in a few minutes, Dio Samuel is going to be joining us because he's part of the podcast story for me. It was one of the very few individuals that started podcasting in Nigeria. We even fondly tell him the founder of podcasting in Nigeria. There's a particular network which we call the Nigerian Podcast Network, NPN, which he is the founder of. Is a Facebook community. And gradually I started saying, okay, how do I make my knowledge of career development to spread to more people? And it was obvious at that time that podcast was going to solve it. At that time, I never knew what podcast was. I only knew it was audio recorded. So I went online, started searching. Fortunately for me, Dio had a podcast. I listened to it a few times. So I went into the experiment, picked up my laptop, and started to record. And definitely those audio quality were very, very poor. Today, I've been able to upgrade my equipment. I'm currently using an Audio Technical ATR, and it's obvious that the quality is better off. Thank you, Dio. The quality is better off, and I've been able to get more gears to be able to get better quality. At the moment, in 2015, I came up with 4 episodes, and I went on a long break. And fortunately for me, I came back in 2016, started with a condenser mic, started recording. Remember, Dio got that for me as well. Started recording my podcast. And in 2016 alone, I went from 4 episodes in 2014. By the end of 2016, I was on episode 45. Currently, I'm on episode 54. That's not the real work. That's not the real story yet. The real story here is the fact that as at few minutes before I started this video presentation, I discovered that my download is currently on 14,970 downloads. And interestingly, I currently have 2 podcasts. So that's a combination of Career and Employability Talk. So Career and Employability Talk was the podcast I had to create dedicated to share career information, dedicated to make career information available to job seekers in Nigeria. The current unemployment rate in Nigeria is so high, is in 2 digits, and I was determined to help solve that problem. So Career and Employability Talk was created in 2014 to help solve career and employability problem in Nigeria. Career and Employability Talk problem in the sense that many individuals are taking career decisions without having adequate information, adequate knowledge on how to go about it. So I decided that based on my experience in human resources, based on my experience to helping organizations to solve their talent issues, I was going to make this information free of charge, without a fee. And that was exactly what I was doing in blogging, and I decided to do via my podcast. Earlier this year, 2017, I started the second podcast channel, which is called the Rookie HR Show. Now, the Rookie HR Show is dedicated to helping HR professionals that are trying to transit into human resources on how to do that. And everything was centered around my story. So every single thing I share on my podcast, on both podcast channels, were strictly on my story of how I transited into human resources from chemical engineering. Because it was just, I was more like the guinea pig. I experimented on how this works on myself, and it becomes easy to share similarly to everybody. Now, my download rate at 14,970 at just 54 episode makes me to think that I think I am doing something right. Because there are times when I go offline and I don't release podcast in 1 month, 2 months, and I still notice the podcast race is going high. And interesting to know that I'm using a plugin powered by one of the sponsors of International Podcast Day, that's Blueberry. So I'm using the plugin, so it gives me the stats on in real life and telling me exactly how the downloads are going. So I noticed that there are people hungry basically for podcasts. And I noticed that, yes, there is a challenge in Nigeria, which is getting better when it comes to data access. Before now, every individual is always conscious of their data. If I need to download a 5 MB audio, how do I go about it? But now data accessibility, the stability of the internet is getting better. So I now notice that people are gradually embracing podcasts. So in a few minutes, I'm going to take a pause, and Dio is going to share a story with us. And that story, which I've requested that he should come and share specifically, is how he started his own podcast. And by virtue of him starting his podcast, it became an encouragement for me to continue to do my podcast, because most of the things I did in setting up my website, I currently have my website at segunakiode.com, powered by WordPress. So everything was more making my 2 podcasts resident there. How I did my plugin setups, how everything, the downloads, the hosting, and everything was more like picking clues from what Dio had done on his own podcast. So I'm going to take a pause now, and I'll give Dio some minutes to share his story of how he started podcasting, because it's important that the world should know about how podcasting is thriving in Nigeria. So I'll take a pause now. Dio will share a few of that story, how we started podcasting, how he encouraged me to also keep going even when I went on a long break. And after then, I'll conclude my presentation. So Dio, you have the floor now.
His mic's muted. Yeah, you may want to keep talking right now.
Okay.
It looks like his video may have dropped out, so he'll probably just jump in here in a second. That's what happened. So yeah, just keep on talking until he comes back.
Okay, that's fine. Just let me know when he's back on. Okay. So interestingly is now one of the major challenges I have in keeping up with my podcast is getting content. So the very first things I needed to do was translate most of my blog post into. Okay, Dayo, you have the floor.
Oh, great. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Can you actually hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, Dayo.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, great. Thank you, Segun, for what you've shared so far. And Dave, can you hear me? How are you doing today? So I really connect with the story you just shared so far, Segun. I admire the time that I've gotten to know you at the podcast, and of course, how you've grown in your journey. Those to you, congratulations. Hi, Dave. Very well. So, to just do a little recap of what Segun has already shared. You started your podcast, and then you started a podcast out of trial and error. You just wanted to find out if it's okay to put your voice over the internet and let people hear you. And then we started talking, and you took it from there and made it into something that's grown bigger than you right now. And right now, today is International Podcast Day, and you are live on the internet. I'm not sure you guys can still hear me.
Yes, I can hear you there.
Let me check. Can you still hear me?
Yes, I can hear you there.
Oh, okay. So you can still hear me. Great. So, amazing. So it's really a great thing to have seen the growth that you've experienced so far. A story. In 2012, when I discovered podcasts for the first time, I didn't actually know what a podcast is before that time. So in 2012, when I discovered what podcast is, it was quite an interesting phenomenon. I was like, so it's possible for somebody to actually capture your voice, place it over the internet, and somebody in a different country, in a different continent can actually listen to you and get value from it. Well, that was my journey into podcast. 2014, we launched my brand online, but that's the I did a lot of podcasts because prior to that time, I discovered nobody was
Just go ahead and keep on going. His video keeps dropping him off. So
Okay.
yeah,
Okay.
he may not be able to participate just with his poor internet connection. So
Okay. I'll go on then. Okay. Dio may not be able to complete the presentation at the moment. He's having a few technical issues. So just trying to add some of the challenges I tend to have on my podcast. So most of what I do now is sharing career-related issues on my podcast. My podcast, Career and Employability Talk, is the podcast dedicated to helping you to move from point A to point B in your career journey. Now, in Nigeria, there are very few human resource professionals operating in that space. So gradually, my podcast, when I was consistent in 2016, started to give me more visibility to the point at which when career-related issues are being made online, let me use the word unconscious to me, people were taking notes. And I found myself in conversations that people get to tag me on career-related issues. And I start to get messages from individuals, which I call the silent listeners, that tend to send messages to me to say, Segun, thank you very much for your podcast, Career and Employability Talk. I listened to your podcast on so and so episode, and it was really beneficial. And I go, wow. When I started, every single day, I was actually looking at the downloads. Days when they just one person, 2, 3. There are times when I downloaded my podcast myself. That looks comical, right? Yes, I go up to the point of downloading the podcast on different devices just so that I can have a download, because I started podcasts at a time when individuals had not embraced podcasting in Nigeria. So currently, months when I've not even released a single podcast and I see my podcast download going high, it tends to gladden my heart. It tends to tell me that I'm doing something right, and it keeps me going. So basically, most of the things I share on my podcast are from my experience as an human resource professional, from my experience as a career coach, from my experience of individuals that help organizations to solve their talent issues, and is able to share exactly what you need to do to get your next job. So at the moment, trying to solve most of the problem of data when it comes to people being jealous about their data downloads for audio. Then I now started needing to research, getting a bit technical, to know how to actually reduce the size of the downloads of the audio from Audacity. I currently use Audacity to edit most of my audios for my podcast. So basically, I now discover that there's a way I can actually walk around the bit rate and getting a bit technical due to some of the experience with which dial I was able to get from him, some of the other information which I was able to get online. Yes, I listened to Daniel J. Lewis, the Audacity to podcast, very well. And most of the information I got to get when I started getting a bit technical around reducing noise, getting used to Audacity, that's how I got to know about this podcast. So Daniel, thank you very much. Keep the good work going. Because I started listening to some of these things to get information. Since most of the content around podcasting is not so much localized in Nigeria, I had to go online to get some of those information. Another interesting individual that have been very useful to me getting better in my podcasting journey is Pat Flynn. He did some series of podcasts on how to podcast. And interestingly, I had to listen to most of those YouTube videos, download some of them, get to listen to them over and over again, set up my RS feed to the point at which currently my podcast, Career Employability Talk, is on iTunes. Career Employability Talk is on Stitcher. It means that I had to go from the point of getting used to every single phase of the podcasting journey, getting information to record, knowing the pulse of the people around me, knowing my audience better. Now, one of my podcasts, which seems to have the highest download rate till date, is on how to negotiate salary with an employer. Now, when I released that podcast, that was episode 7 of my podcast. When I released that podcast, it was an experiment. Because of my experience as an HR person, I noticed that most of the challenge job seekers usually have majorly is how do they negotiate a salary with an employer. So coming up with that podcast and noticing that till date, it seems to have the highest download rate. So what did I do again? Earlier this year, I had to do a Facebook audio live session talking about another dimensions to how to negotiate salary with an employer. Now, the whole idea is to be able to play more to what my audience need the most. So it's important that when I release my podcast, I'm checking the pulse of my audience. I'm getting to know so I'm on various Facebook groups, and on Facebook, I notice the kind of information they share the most on Twitter, on Facebook, Instagram, depending on as I have a growing podcast email list, which I push my podcast to as soon as it's released. So I tend to gather information, and it helps me with my content creation. Now, Nigerian Podcast Network is also a very good place where I get to get ideas. Recently, I put up a post on the podcast that I was going to quit podcasting. And in few minutes of putting up that post, individuals started to give me ideas to maintain fresh content. So the most important thing, the basic thing here is keeping my content fresh, playing to the pulse of my audience, and being able to release the podcast that suits their need. And gradually, I'm beginning to get information. There are a few guests that I'm going to be putting on my podcast currently that are not currently within the shores of Nigeria, but I got information that they found my podcast on iTunes. That means I'm doing something right, and it's an encouragement for me. So these are information I get when I think I want to give up podcasting. I get information around somebody that have had one thing or the other to learn from my podcast. And as a result of that, I tell myself, Segun, this is not the time to quit. All I need to do is to refresh and get going. So interestingly for me is the fact that I'm adding value to people in my community in Nigeria. And from my podcast, there was a particular time I had to be a guest on Dial's show. And from that podcast, I got my very first international paid coaching call just from podcasting. From that singular podcast, I got my very first speaking engagement just by someone that listened to my earlier podcast and felt, we're trying to do this career development program. Who are we going to call? I think we're going to call Segun to come around. And that is an encouragement to say, I am solving a problem, the career development problem via podcasting. So when I think I want to give up, when I think I don't have anything to do anymore, I remember podcasting. I remember the individuals that are depending on me, the lives that are depending on me to share the information, and I keep going. And I keep going. Today in the human resources field in Nigeria, unconsciously, my name gets called. Reason because my podcast is beginning to make me a thought leader. Thought leader in the sense that individuals begin to add flesh to my voice. They've heard me so much more to the point at which when I released my book, I'm an author. I've actually authored a book called Corporate Misfit, Immutable Career Lessons for Fresh Graduates. At the time my book was authored, my podcast was useful to pushing my book, because at the point I was podcasting, because I needed to make my voice go viral, if I'm permitted to use that word. And all I needed to do was to push the information out to every people that need the information. And all that is currently being done at the moment is helping to enlighten people. I love knowledge sharing. So talking about my podcast becomes like second nature to me. So it gives me the vibes. And gradually I'm beginning to see that are also coming into podcasting. Recently, a particular person told me about starting his own podcast, and he's in the career development space. And it begins to make it look that I'm doing something right. So individuals are beginning to call me for events when it comes to career development, telling me to know that, yes, Segun is the go-to man. And that's all because of podcasting. So if there's something that podcasting has done for me, it has given me visibility, it has given me a voice, it is already establishing me as a thought leader in the career development space and human resources space in Nigeria. Similarly, that was the reason why I started my second podcast channel, The Rookie HR Show. Now, the major reason why I started the Rookie HR Show was simply because I was getting requests from young individuals, young graduates, young individuals that want to get into the human resources field, because there was a time I had to release my experience, how I transited into human resources and how I got my first HR job 8 weeks barely after my NYC. It was released in a podcast. After that singular podcast, I got so much request on a day-to-day basis on my LinkedIn channel, Twitter, on my DM on Twitter, of individuals that want to start a career in human resources. So all I needed to do was to find a way to solve that problem. If I want to mentor each individual that want to start their career in HR on a one-to-one basis, it will take me a long time to reach them. So all I needed to do was to start a second podcast channel, The Rookie HR Show, just as a virtual online mentorship platform for young HR professionals and individuals wanting to transit from another career into human resources, basically to be able to solve another problem. What is that problem? Career change. Individuals that want to move into HR. And basically what I teach on that channel is to tell people about how am I able to do it. And I draw from my experience as an human resource consultant. Currently, I consult for organizations. I help them to solve issues around their talent. I help them to solve issues around how they pay their people. That's around total rewards. And these are some of the things that become useful. So the Rookie HR Show is a typically technical human resource channel, while Career and Employability Talk is strictly for fresh graduates and young professionals. And Career and Employability Talk solves the problem of the job search process, solves the problem around career development, career management, helping people to give them information that are guarded. Because in Nigeria, when individuals go for interviews, these are some of the problems they have. They don't know what the interviewers are actually looking for in the job. So it becomes important for them to know exactly what they are looking for. So at that point, it's important for me to share it. So I make that into a podcast channel. I go for an assessment center. After the assessment center, I talk about it and say, what are the things that candidates are doing wrong when they come to assessment center? The next thing I do is to release a podcast on how do you ace a job, an assessment center interview. How do you ace how do you ace assessment center when you are called for one? How do you ace job interviews? I put that into a podcast episode. I record a podcast around it. I record podcasts around CV writing, because that's one of the major problems. Individuals send CVs, they don't know what employers are looking for. So I release a podcast, CV writing tips for job seekers, just to be able to share the information and make them available for them. Now, what's the next challenge? What's the next big aspiration for me? Now, currently, I am beginning to move some of my podcasts into video. So video is now like the next thing for me. I remember recently I had to record some set of videos around career development, which shortly they're going to be released on my Facebook, on my YouTube channel very soon. Now, this is all trying to solve a problem through the medium of podcasting. So on a daily basis, I'm part of a WhatsApp group that has most HR professionals in Nigeria. And most of that, recently we got into a conversation around having an HR dedicated radio show. And immediately that conversation came up, I had to jump into the conversation. And I said, come, why invest so much in starting a radio show when we can start from the point of podcasting? And I started to lecture them around podcasting. And gradually, they are beginning to embrace podcasting as a solution in the meantime before they transit into radio. So what do I use podcasting to? To me, podcasting is a platform. It's a platform to share my knowledge. It's a platform to teach people on career development. It's a platform to teach people on how to get HR jobs. It's a platform for me to share knowledge basically on what I do. So podcasting to me is more than just audio. It's a tool to reach more people. Please, if you have questions, let me know so that I will be able to attend to some of those responses, basically. So just trying to check through the chat room and see if I'm missing anything at the moment. Okay, so I'm just trying to check my time to be sure that I've not overshoot my time at the moment. Shortly, just a few things, just one or two things to cover, and I will be through with my presentation for today. So another interesting thing which is worthy of note is the fact that I've also been instrumental to help some other people to set up their podcast channel. So there was a time I got an information from someone in Mauritius. A lady in Mauritius needed me to help her because she downloads my podcast and she gets to ask questions around how does she do that. Now, that's some of the things. So in Sub-Saharan Africa today, I seem to be getting a following around people that are downloading my podcast. And the reason is that when I check my podcast rate, I get download from different parts of the world. So it means individuals are really interested in the quality of what is. It's not a function of just having a podcast. It's a function of having a message. Having a message everybody identifies with, having a message whereby it's tailored to your audience, having a message that is, well, people are able to, when I share my story or when I introduce myself to people around how a chemical engineer turned human resource professional, everybody just listening, everybody just take a pause and say, how did that happen? How did that happen? And exactly how it happened is what I've shared so far today, because it gives me a voice. Because people are able to associate with my message. There's so many individuals trying to transit into HR. And for them, it's important for them to know what it takes to transit into HR. So when I tell them about the Rookie HR show, they said, oh, what does the Rookie HR show do? The Rookie HR show help you to solve how to translate into human resources. And they go, wow. So that means I can be able to transit into human resources. Okay, I'll take a look at the Rookie HR show. When people tell me about how do I, Segun, they send me a DM, please, I'm trying to go for a job interview and I don't know what to do about it. I just say, no problem. I've released a podcast around how to ace job interviews. And I send them the link, boom. And they get back and say, wow, that solved my problem. That helps me to be able to ace that interview. I've had testimonials of individuals that got jobs by listening to 1 or 2 episodes of my podcast. So to me, it gives me encouragement. It gives me fulfillment. Because one of my mantra is I'm committed to personal development and I have a desire to leave my footprint on the sand of time. So if my podcast becomes a platform to be able to pass that message across, it gives me fulfillment. It gives me a sense of fulfillment that, yes, I think I am doing something right because I'm adding value to people. I'm solving problems. I'm solving the career problem. I'm solving the unemployment problem. I'm solving the employability problem, and it gives me joy. And I think because of my podcasts, I think that is why I am on representing Nigeria today on International Podcast Day 2017. So that means I've been able to put myself, my country on the world map, which is something instrumental. And one of the interesting things about podcasting is that you're not only speaking to a local audience. As much as your information is useful to your local audience, the global audience is also interested in your message, and it becomes something very useful for us to take note of. Okay, just a minute. Okay.
Great message. Like you said, it's a matter of getting your voice out there. It's about having a message. It's about having some intent behind what you're doing in there, whether it's in whatever business space you're in. You're in career employment and development, and having your voice out there and being able to connect with those listeners and being a resource for them too. It's just not about getting behind the mic, recording, providing information and content. It's about being that continual resource for them. If they need something, they know they can come to you because you're a trusted source. That's really cool to hear. Yeah, I'm excited to have you on the stream. I mean, I've learned so much about the podcasting space and the growth of podcast listening in the Nigeria area. It's quite amazing as I look at it. Just to see the overall growth in that area is impressive.
Yeah. It's really impressive, and it really means that people are beginning to embrace it. So it means we must be ready when they need information. Thank you for having me on.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you guys have a thriving podcast network out there in Nigeria?
Yes, we have a thriving Facebook community called the Nigerian Podcast Network.
Excellent.
Dio is actually the founder. I unfortunately was not able to share that story. Currently, I think we have close to about over 2,000 members in that group at the moment, and it's growing every day. So we share podcasting information. People come up with their questions around what they need to do around their equipment, around how to set up RS feed, and there are a few thriving individuals that want to go into podcasting. They're also in that thriving network as well.
That's great, because I think when you and Dio are right on the cutting edge of what's going on in the growth, that you guys can be those two podcasters that elevate the space and continue to promote the growth. And congratulations to you guys. I hope nothing but success in your region. And I couldn't have been happier to have you represent. So as we conclude this hour, I'll let you have the final word. Any other bits you want to add to, and then also where people can find your work. Where's the easiest place for everybody to find you?
Okay, everything resident on my website at the moment, www.segunakiode.com, and you can also reach me on Twitter, Segun Akiode, everywhere on social media, Segun Akiode, on Instagram, my Facebook page profile, Akiode Segun Oluwatosin, and one site you get all the information you need.
Excellent.
And okay, just final word. It's a great honor to be on International Podcast Day 2017. I count it as an honor to represent Nigeria, and I hope subsequently Nigeria will be surely ready to join 2018 edition. Thank you very much. I hope I've added value today.
You've added tremendous value. So yeah, thank you for joining us. Everybody, continue to use hashtag International Podcast Day as we celebrate September 30th as our day, our time to shine, and our time to spread the word of the power of podcasts. So thank you again. I am Dave Lee, co-founder of International Podcast Day. One final shout out to our sponsors, Blueberry, Studio 21 Podcast Cafe, The Messengers, a podcast documentary, and Podable. Once again, thank you, everybody, and happy International Podcast Day.
Same to you. Cheers.